An unexpected pact between a pagan king and the patriarch of a faith destined to change history forever. Abimelech and Abraham, two figures separated by cultures, beliefs, and opposing paths, found in their encounter something that defied all logic, an alliance that transcended the limits of the human and the divine. But what mysteries lie behind this surprising relationship? How did the hand of God work amidst conflicts, dreams, and promises to transform these leaders into eternal allies? Join us on this fascinating journey as we unravel every detail of this story, which set a precedent for peace and collaboration in a world torn by discord. If you are passionate about biblical stories filled with meaning and eternal teachings, subscribe now. Share this video with someone who should know about it, and stay with us until the end to discover how this pact not only changed their lives, but also the course of history itself. Prepare to travel to the vast landscapes of Canaan, where kingdoms rose and fell under the weight of alliances and wars. Amidst this rugged terrain stood Gerar, a fortified city in the heart of the desert, ruled by Abimelech, a monarch recognized both for his political cunning and his inclination toward justice. Thanks to its fertile lands and its shrewd ruler, Gerar thrived despite turbulent times. Abimelech was a middle-aged man whose presence commanded respect. His firm and determined voice resonated in the royal council, but behind his regal demeanor lay a man of deep thought, shaped by years of leadership in an era of uncertainty. Though his pride sometimes led him to rash decisions, the elders of Gerar considered him a wise and fair ruler, concerned for the well-being of his people. He was known for his ability to mediate disputes, ensure the safety of travelers, and keep water wells open, vital sources for survival in that arid land. Gerar, strategically located along trade routes, attracted merchants, shepherds, and travelers from distant lands. However, with this influx also came conflicts. Nomadic tribes and neighboring kingdoms constantly vied for the region's resources, and Abimelech had to employ all his diplomatic skills to maintain stability in his domain. One night, however, his destiny took an unexpected turn. After a day of intense deliberations in his council, the king retired to his chambers seeking rest. But in the silence of the early morning, an extraordinary vision startled him. In his dream, a majestic figure, wrapped in a celestial radiance, appeared before him. Its presence emanated an authority impossible to ignore. "Abimelech, pay attention," declared the figure in a voice that resounded like distant thunder. "A man has arrived in your land. He is my servant, and I have made a covenant with him. Be careful with your actions toward him, for what you do to Abraham will have consequences for you and your kingdom." The king wished to respond, but his lips remained mute. The figure continued its warning, revealing that a hidden danger loomed if he did not act wisely. Before he could fully grasp the message, Abimelech awoke abruptly, his heart pounding and his face covered in sweat. The dark silence of the chamber offered no comfort. Something within him knew that this vision was not a mere dream but a divine warning. Restless, he rose and walked to the window. He gazed at the starry sky, seeking answers in the vastness of the night. Never before had he experienced such a clear and momentous revelation. As a king, he trusted his intuition, but this time was different. He knew he could not ignore it. At dawn, he gathered his closest advisors, and, with a solemn voice, recounted his experience. He omitted the most personal aspects of the dream, but made it clear that he had received a message that could change everything. The wise men listened in silence, exchanging glances filled with concern. Something great was about to happen, and no one could foresee how it would alter the fate of Abimelech, Abraham, and the history we know. Stay with us to discover the outcome of this impactful story. one of the most unexpected and significant alliances in the Bible. You will be amazed. One of them, an elder who had served Abimelech's predecessors, finally broke the silence. His voice, worn by the years, carried the weight of accumulated experience. My lord, dreams like the one you describe are not common in our tradition. It is said that the gods or divine messengers use these means to communicate with men. This Abraham must be someone significant. If the dream is a warning, it would be wise to investigate it with caution. Abimelech nodded slowly, though the elder's words did not dispel the unease that gripped him. As the day passed, the warning grew heavier and more oppressive. Who was this Abraham? Why was he so crucial to that celestial message? The mystery completely enveloped him. The only thing Abimelech knew for certain was that he had to act with wisdom and discernment. His kingdom, his people, and perhaps even his own life were at stake. The threat, though veiled, awakened in him a sense of urgency. It was not just a dream. Something deeper had been planted in his heart, and the possibility that his kingdom was in danger forced him to reconsider every future decision. Thus began a story that would test not only his leadership, but also the unexpected bond between a king and a man sent by Providence to change the course of his destiny. The horizon of Gerar began to glow with the first rays of dawn, as a caravan of tents and livestock appeared in the distance. The local shepherds, accustomed to the arrival of travelers, observed the approaching group with curiosity. But this was no ordinary caravan. The men who formed it walked with disciplined bearing, and the women, though discreet, moved with an unusual grace. Leading them all, an elderly man advanced with a firm step. His face bore the marks of a journey filled with trials, decisions, and promises that defied time. He was Abraham, the nomadic patriarch, a man whose name resonated throughout Canaan for his wealth, his wisdom, and his enigmatic relationship with the invisible God he served. At his side traveled Sarah, whose beauty defied the passage of time. Her face radiated a light that captivated all who beheld her, and her presence was worthy of a queen. Though her heart bore the weight of silences and sacrifices from a life beside Abraham, she did not go unnoticed. The arrival of Abraham and his entourage soon reached the ears of the royal council. The sentinels of Gerar quickly reported to their superiors, and it was not long before news of a wealthy and influential foreigner reached Abimelech. Intrigued by the identity of this man, the king ordered close watch over the arrival of the company. Abraham, for his part, was well aware of the dangers of every new land. Experience had taught him that, at times, truth could be a double-edged sword. Therefore, when Gerar's officials approached to inquire about his group, Abraham decided to present Sarah not as his wife, but as his sister. It was a half-truth, but enough to avoid unnecessary conflicts in an unfamiliar territory. Sarah, as she had many times before, silently accepted this decision, but in her heart, fear pulsed at what might happen. She knew that her beauty was a gift, but also a burden, and when the kingdom's officials saw her, they could not hide their astonishment. Her loveliness was like a whisper of spring in the dry landscape of Gerar. The news quickly reached the palace. The report spoke not only of Abraham's immense fortune, but also of the unparalleled beauty of the woman who accompanied him. Intrigued, Abimelech listened to every word with growing interest. Something inside him told him that this encounter would change his life forever. A woman of such beauty? Abimelech asked, raising an eyebrow with a glint of interest in his gaze. And you say she is the sister of this foreigner? Yes, my lord. That is what they have stated themselves, the officials replied, bowing their heads in respect. The king's curiosity intertwined with a subtle desire. In those lands, it was customary for monarchs to welcome distinguished women from foreign groups into their harems, especially if they were not bound by marriage. For Abimelech, the situation seemed favorable. A woman of extraordinary beauty and a man who raised no objections to her presence in the kingdom. Without delay, he ordered that Sarah be brought to the palace with all the honors befitting a royal guest. The news reached Abraham, wrapped in an air of courtesy, but with a determination that left no room for protest. The officials informed him that the king wished to meet Sarah and honor her with a privileged place in his royal circle. Abraham, troubled, remained silent. The strategy he had devised for protection now led him into uncertain territory. Internally, he wrestled with fear and guilt. He had trusted in his prudence, but now he understood that his decision had placed Sarah in a dangerous situation. Sarah, for her part, was escorted to the palace with the bearing of a queen. The corridors adorned with tapestries and reliefs proclaiming the glory of Gerar seemed insignificant compared to the uncertainty that gripped her. Though the officials treated her with respect, she could not ignore the risk her position entailed. Her heart pounded, clinging to the faith that had sustained her in her darkest moments. In the great hall of the palace, Abimelech received her with an inquisitive gaze. There was no intention in him to subjugate or harm her, but rather to integrate her with honor into the royal environment. Yet something about Sarah unsettled him. It was not just her beauty that impressed him, but her unshakable serenity. There was a presence within her, a strength that transcended the earthly. Sarah, with measured words and graceful gestures, responded prudently to the monarch's questions. She did not reveal the truth about her relationship with Abraham, avoiding any hint that might raise suspicion. Abimelech, convinced that she was the foreigner's sister, ordered that she be treated with the highest honors and offered a privileged place in the palace. But that night, as the moon rose over the fields of Gerar, an inexplicable unease took hold of the king. What he had considered a simple decision began to weigh on his mind with an unknown force. He did not yet know that his choice had drawn the attention of a power far greater than his own. The kingdom, until then prosperous and at peace, was about to face an unexpected turn. Abimelech would soon discover that not everything in human life moved under his dominion. The arrival of Abraham and Sarah in Gerar had sown the seed of a conflict that would go beyond political dynamics. The struggle would not be merely between men, but between the human and the divine, challenging the certainties with which Abimelech had ruled for years. The palace of Gerar sank into a solemn silence as the night spread its mantle over the city. The stars shone with an unusual intensity, as if announcing a momentous event. Abimelech, exhausted after a day of audiences and state affairs, retired to his chambers. Fatigue overcame him quickly, and he soon fell into a deep sleep. But this dream would not be like the others. In the vast darkness of his subconscious, the king found himself in an unfamiliar landscape. A barren, lifeless field stretched before him. The air was dense, oppressive, and an overwhelming silence surrounded him. Something or someone was about to manifest. Unbeknownst to him, Abimelech was about to receive a message that would change his destiny forever. As Abimelech walked through that unsettling dream, searching for a point of reference in the vast darkness, an imposing figure emerged from the shadows. Its presence filled the space with undeniable authority, and though its face was not entirely visible, its voice echoed like distant thunder. "Abimelech," the figure said in a firm but unaggressive tone, "you are about to commit a grave mistake. The woman you have taken, Sarah, is not Abraham's sister but his wife. She belongs to him, and your action has awakened my wrath." Abimelech's heart pounded. He tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The figure continued, "Your ignorance has protected you until now, but you must act immediately. Return Abraham's wife to him, for he is a prophet, and his prayer for you will be your salvation. If you do not, your house and your entire kingdom will suffer the consequences." The vision intensified. Abimelech saw fleeting images of his people suffering dry wells, barren fields, and a darkness that seemed to consume everything. The weight of the warning was overwhelming, but before he could ask for explanations, the dream ended abruptly. He awoke with a gasp, his body drenched in cold sweat. The flames of the chamber's lamps flickered weakly, and reality seemed to waver under the impact of what he had just experienced. The king remained motionless for several minutes, trying to steady his breathing. Unlike ordinary dreams that fade upon waking, this one was vivid, powerful, and every word still echoed in his mind. How had this happened? What kind of man was Abraham that God himself would intervene in such a manner? With dawn still distant, Abimelech rose and began pacing his chamber. His mind wavered between fear and skepticism. As a king, he was accustomed to making decisions based on logic and tangible evidence. But this dream, though intangible, was too clear and specific to ignore. However, accepting the warning meant admitting that he had acted wrongly, even if out of ignorance. His pride wrestled with the idea that a foreigner, a nomad without his own land, could be so important in the eyes of the God who had revealed himself. Even so, the threat was too great to dismiss. The fate of his kingdom was at stake, and the weight of his responsibility as a leader outweighed his ego. Uncertainty consumed him, and as the night advanced, he summoned some of his most trusted advisors. Without going into too much detail, he described the dream and asked for their counsel. The elders, upon hearing the mention of a God who protected Abraham, grew uneasy. Though they did not worship Abraham's God, they recognized that this foreigner had a special connection with the divine. "My lord," one of the advisors said, "if this dream is truly a warning from a powerful God, it would be wise to act quickly. We do not know Abraham in depth, but his arrival in our land does not seem to be a coincidence. Return his wife to him, and perhaps this will end in peace." The advisor's words resonated with Abimelech, but the final decision was his. For the rest of the night, he wrestled with his emotions. The idea that his seemingly innocent act could bring disaster filled him with fear. On the other hand, the humiliation of admitting his mistake tormented him deeply. When the first rays of the sun illuminated the palace towers, Abimelech made his decision. He would return Sarah to Abraham, not only out of fear of the dream's warning, but because something within him had changed. That dream experience was not just a threat, but a call to act with justice. Beyond his pride and his right as king, he felt he had to obey. The fate of his kingdom was at stake, and in his heart beat an undeniable truth. He had stood before a greater force, one he could not ignore. As the day began, Abimelech prepared to face Abraham. He did not know how he would be received, but he was determined to amend his mistake before his people suffered the consequences. The internal struggle he had fought through the night faded before his sense of responsibility. What he was about to do would not only define his leadership, but also his relationship with the divine. The sun rose on the horizon, painting the sky in gold and orange. Mounted on his horse, accompanied by a small retinue of trusted officials, Abimelech set out toward Abraham's camp. He was unarmed, yet armed with truth and conviction. He knew that this encounter was not just with a man, but with the prophet of a God who had spoken to him in dreams. Meanwhile, in the camp, Abraham oversaw the morning tasks. Though his faith was strong, he could not help but feel uneasy. He knew that presenting Sarah as his sister had been a precaution, but now he feared the consequences. When his sentries spotted the king's approach with his escort, the camp stirred. Abraham's men instinctively gathered, ready to protect their leader, but Abraham raised a hand to calm them. He saw no signs of hostility in the king's entourage. Abimelech dismounted with determination and advanced toward Abraham. His gaze reflected a mix of anger and perplexity. It was not the look of a monarch outraged by mere deception, but of a man who had been confronted with something far greater than himself. "Abraham," Abimelech said firmly, "what have you done to us? What sin have I committed against you, that you would bring such a great guilt upon my kingdom? You told me Sarah was your sister, and because of that I took her, believing I was acting justly. Now in a dream your God has revealed the truth to me. She is your wife. I nearly brought upon my people the wrath of your God." The echo of his words spread through the silence of the camp. Abraham met the king's gaze, aware of the gravity of the situation. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice filled with sincerity and remorse. "I did not mean to cause you harm, Abimelech," he replied calmly. "I thought that this place, like others I have been to, had no fear of God. I believed that if they knew Sarah was my wife, the men would kill me to take her. She is my wife, but she is also my father's daughter, though not my mother's. That is why I said she was my sister." Abraham's words revealed more than just a strategy. They spoke of a man who, despite his faith, still feared for his life in foreign lands. His confession was not just an explanation, but an expression of vulnerability. Abimelech studied Abraham carefully. He now saw clearly that the patriarch's lie had not been out of malice but survival. And though it had brought consequences, it had also served to reveal something greater than both of them: the power of a God who intervened in human affairs. The air filled with tense silence, but in the king's eyes there was no resentment, only newfound understanding. The truth had been exposed, and with it, an opportunity to act with justice. The fate of both men was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would be recorded in history as a testament to divine power and mercy. The silence between them stretched on, and the tension in the air became almost tangible. The men around them, expectant, barely dared to breathe. Finally, Abimelech exhaled heavily, a reflection of the unease that had accompanied him since that unsettling revelation in his dream. He stepped forward, gesturing toward the camp with a restrained motion. "Do you understand the weight of your words, Abraham?" the king asked, his voice more reflective but still firm. "My entire people stood on the brink of danger without even knowing it. If your God had not warned me, what fate would have awaited us? We are not perfect, but neither are we men without fear of the divine. You have underestimated my kingdom, and your precautions, far from protecting you, nearly led us to ruin." Abraham lowered his head. Deep in his heart he knew the king's words were just. He had judged the men of Gerar harshly, without giving them a chance to prove their true nature. However, his first loyalty was to his family and the promises of the Most High, and that loyalty had driven him to act with a prudence that now, in retrospect, seemed excessive. Abimelech, perceiving the shadow of remorse on Abraham's face, softened his stance. Though the encounter had begun with tension, the king understood that confronting the patriarch harshly would only fan the flames of conflict. What his kingdom needed was not a dispute but a solution that would restore peace. "Listen, Abraham," he said in a more conciliatory tone. "I do not wish to be at odds with you or your God. I will return Sarah to you, and as proof of my sincerity, I will give you livestock, servants, and land so that you may live in peace among us. But I also hope you will consider the consequences of your actions. I am not your enemy, and I wish for us to coexist in understanding." Abraham lifted his gaze, moved by the king's nobility. Despite the initial misunderstanding, Abimelech demonstrated an uncommon integrity among the monarchs of his time. He nodded respectfully and, in a gesture of reconciliation, extended his hand. I accept your words, Abimelech, and I thank you for your generosity. I will pray to the Lord for you and your kingdom, that the afflictions upon your house may be lifted. May this experience teach us both to walk with greater wisdom." The pact between the two men was sealed at that moment. What had begun as a confrontation filled with tension transformed into an opportunity for growth and mutual understanding. Though their paths were different, they were intertwined by a higher purpose. With the dawn came a new chapter. Abraham's camp was enveloped in an atmosphere of anticipation. The men moved cautiously, aware of the significance of the day. Sarah, now back among her own, prepared to witness the resolution of this trial. The previous night had been marked by a whirlwind of emotions, the relief of having emerged unharmed from the palace, and the unease over the consequences of what had happened. For his part, Abimelech did not delay in keeping his word. The next morning, escorted by a retinue of men guiding herds and transporting goods, he made his way to Abraham's camp. Though the meeting retained its formality, the king's face reflected a mixture of determination and humility. This was not merely a diplomatic act, it was a declaration of intent, an acknowledgement that Abraham's God was powerful and that the path of righteousness required concrete actions. The story between Abraham and Abimelech was not written in resentment but in understanding. Two men, two different worlds, bound by a lesson that transcended their own destinies. When the king reached the patriarch, silence stretched between them. Two men, different in their paths and their fates, looked at each other with an intensity that spoke more than words ever could. Finally, Abimelech broke the silence. "Here is Sarah, Abraham," said the king, gesturing toward the woman standing among the servants of his retinue. "I not only return her to you, but I also bring offerings as a sign of peace. This livestock, these servants, and 1,000 pieces of silver are yours. Let this serve as proof to all that I never intended to offend you or your God." Abraham, moved by the king's sincerity, stepped forward. His voice, calm yet filled with authority, resonated clearly in the air. "I appreciate your gesture, Abimelech. Your willingness to make amends shows a noble heart. I will pray to the Lord for you and your people, so that the afflictions you have suffered may be lifted. May this reconciliation mark the beginning of a lasting peace between us." Abimelech nodded, accepting Abraham's words as a blessing in themselves. The tension that had defined their initial encounters began to dissipate. In Abraham, the king no longer saw just a powerful foreigner, but a man whose faith made him an instrument of something far greater. That same night, after Abimelech returned to his palace, Abraham fulfilled his promise. Under the starry sky, he raised his hands and prayed fervently, calling upon God for the healing of the kingdom of Gerar. His words, filled with faith and humility, rose like a cry for redemption. And God heard the prayer of his servant. The afflictions that had fallen upon Abimelech's household began to fade. The barrenness that had affected the women was reversed, bringing with it the hope of new life. The land, which had started to wither, regained its greenery. It was as if a dark shadow had been lifted from the region, and the people of Gerar felt the touch of divine mercy. Abimelech, witnessing these changes, understood that Abraham's words were not mere religious rituals. They were the bridge between the human and the divine, a manifestation of the power of Abraham's God. His respect for the patriarch grew, not only because of the divine intervention, but also because of the way the man of faith had handled the situation with patience and wisdom. In the days that followed, Abimelech and Abraham met again, this time in an atmosphere of greater trust. In their conversations, they shared stories, beliefs, and reflections, exploring the differences and similarities between their lives. Abimelech, despite his authority as king, recognized in Abraham a man whose faith transcended any earthly dominion. For his part, Abraham began to see in Abimelech a leader with the ability to learn and make amends. Despite their differences, they found common ground, the recognition of a supreme power, sovereign over all kingdoms and destinies. "Abimelech," said Abraham during one of their conversations, "our lives could not be more different. But there is something I have learned from this encounter. The will of God transcends our decisions. And though we make mistakes, He always offers us the opportunity to correct them and learn." Abimelech nodded, his gaze filled with newfound understanding. "And I have learned," the king replied, "that a man's power does not lie only in his armies or his wealth, but in his ability to listen and obey what is right. Your God is just and merciful, and what I have experienced with you will be a lesson that marks my life and my kingdom." Two men, two different worlds, united by a divinely orchestrated encounter. In the story of Abraham and Abimelech, there were no victors or defeated, only two souls who learned that, in the eyes of the Most High, true greatness is found in humility and the desire to walk in His will. Thus, what began as a conflict transformed into a relationship of mutual respect, cemented by divine intervention. The commitment of both men to honor the truths they had discovered was firm. Though their paths would eventually separate, the impact of this encounter would remain engraved in their lives as a testimony to the power of reconciliation and obedience to divine will. Time passed in the region, but the recent events left a deep mark on both Abimelech and Abraham. What had begun with tension and fear unexpectedly turned into a relationship marked by curiosity and mutual respect, which slowly evolved into a unique friendship. From his throne, Abimelech observed the patriarch with growing interest. At first, he had considered him merely a wandering nomad passing through his territory. But now, with each passing day, he realized that Abraham was different. His unwavering faith, his way of leading, and the serenity with which he faced difficulties spoke of a connection with the divine that the king had never seen in another man. Abimelech's curiosity led him to send messengers to Abraham's camp under the pretense of courtesy. The reports they brought back only deepened his interest. They spoke of a leader who exercised authority with justice and wisdom, who inspired respect not through force, but through the conviction with which he lived. A man who knew when to speak and when to remain silent, whose decisions seemed guided by a higher force. For his part, Abraham noticed the king's friendly gestures. At first, he remained cautious, for life had taught him to distrust power. However, over time, he came to recognize Abimelech's sincerity. This led him to gradually open up, sharing fragments of his life and his faith. In the vast fields of Gerar, their encounters became an uncommon routine. While Abraham inspected his flocks or watched over the water wells, it was not unusual for the king to appear, often without an escort, leaving behind the formality of the palace. In those impromptu meetings, conversation flowed naturally. Abimelech wanted to understand what drove this man to live with such absolute certainty. "Abraham," Abimelech said on one such occasion as they walked beside a newly dug well, "I have observed how you lead your people. They do not merely obey your orders. They seem to trust you in a way beyond what I have seen in other leaders. How do you achieve this?" Abraham smiled slightly, reflecting on the question. "It is not about me. My people trust because I also trust. My guidance does not come from my own wisdom or experience, but from my faith in the Lord. It is He who directs my steps, and when He acts, His will is above mine." Abimelech pondered the patriarch's words. For a king who had built his reign on strength, strategy, and earthly power, such an idea was difficult to grasp. Yet in the way Abraham spoke, there was an unshakable certainty, a conviction that went beyond any human logic. At that moment, Abimelech understood that Abraham's true power did not lie in his wealth or the number of his followers. His real strength came from something far greater, the absolute certainty that he did not walk alone. On another occasion, Abimelech observed how Abraham interacted with Sarah and his family. Though their customs differed, the king was impressed by the closeness and respect Abraham showed toward his wife and his clan. In a world where power often distanced leaders from their families, Abraham demonstrated an uncommon balance between authority and affection. "Your family seems to follow you with love and not just obedience," Abimelech remarked during one of their encounters. "Love and obedience are not opposites," Abraham responded calmly. "When you love those you lead and they know you seek their well-being, obedience flows naturally. The same happens in my relationship with God. I obey Him because I trust in His love for me." The patriarch's words resonated with Abimelech, who began to see in Abraham not just a man of faith, but also a teacher of practical wisdom. Though he never openly admitted it, the king started to value these encounters as a space where he could learn from a man with a completely different worldview. As time passed, the occasional meetings became something more meaningful. Abimelech began seeking out Abraham, not just out of political interest or curiosity, but for the peace he found in his company. There was an honesty in him that was rarely seen in circles of power. Abraham, for his part, discovered in Abimelech a man willing to learn and grow. One day, while they shared a meal under the shade of a tree, Abimelech expressed something he had been reflecting on for weeks. "Abraham, I must admit that at first, I did not understand your way of life. To me, power is measured in armies, wealth, and walls that protect a kingdom. But seeing you, I am beginning to understand that true power is not always visible. Your faith is a strength that neither gold nor weapons can match." Abraham, touched by the king's words, replied humbly, "And I have learned something from you, Abimelech. Though we come from different worlds, your willingness to listen and change shows that power also lies in the desire to improve. This friendship is a gift I did not expect, but one I deeply value." Thus, what began as a tense encounter between two men on opposite paths transformed into an unlikely friendship, built on mutual respect and admiration. Their conversations became a space where they shared ideas, reflected on their responsibilities, and explored ways to lead with justice and purpose. Though their lives were destined to follow different trajectories, both Abraham and Abimelech knew that their meetings in the fields of Gerar were a sign of something greater, the ability of men to come together in the pursuit of what is just, true, and eternal. The prosperity of the fields around Gerar, nurtured by the peaceful relationship between Abraham and Abimelech, was not without challenges. The region, though rich in pastures, depended on wells for survival. In arid lands, water was a vital resource, more valuable than gold or livestock. The wells, dug with great effort and fiercely protected, were a source of both pride and conflict. One day, as Abraham's servants led their flocks to a well near the camp, they encountered resistance. Abimelech's servants, tasked with protecting the kingdom's resources, claimed the well as their own. The argument quickly escalated from words to threats, and though no physical violence occurred, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Abraham received the news of the conflict with serenity, but deep inside he understood the gravity of the situation. His servants, loyal and fervent, insisted that the well belonged to them, as they had dug it with their own hands. However, Abraham saw beyond the water and the land. What was truly at stake was the peace he had built with Abimelech. Allowing this dispute to grow would mean risking everything they had worked so hard to establish. For his part, Abimelech also received reports from his servants. He trusted their loyalty, but he was not oblivious to the complexity of such matters. He knew that in these arid lands, water meant not only survival but also dominion and stability. However, the king was not willing to let a disagreement destroy the bond of respect and trust he had forged with Abraham. Determined to resolve the situation justly, Abimelech sent a clear and direct message to Abraham, a meeting to find a fair solution, without accusations or recriminations, only an honest dialogue in search of peace. Abraham, trusting in the king's integrity, accepted without hesitation. The meeting took place in a neutral valley, surrounded by hills where shepherds often led their flocks to rest. Both leaders arrived accompanied by their servants, who, though tense, showed due respect to their masters. Abimelech, with the calm of a man who values reason over conflict, spoke first. Abraham, in the past we have faced differences, but we have always found the path of justice. I do not want this well to be an exception. My servants claim it belongs to my kingdom, but I have also heard that yours dug it. I want to know your truth, so we can find a solution that benefits us both. Abraham nodded, appreciating the king's willingness to engage in dialogue. With a serene but firm voice, he replied, "My men dug that well when we arrived in this land, with hard work and dedication, without any intention of taking what does not belong to us. However, I understand that its location may have caused confusion. I do not wish for this to divide us, Abimelech. I am willing to reach a fair agreement that ensures peace and prosperity for both our people." The patriarch's words dispelled the remaining tension. Abimelech, impressed by his conciliatory attitude, proposed a pact. The well would remain under Abraham's control, but access would be guaranteed for both communities. It would be a symbol of cooperation rather than discord. To seal the agreement, Abraham offered 7 sheep from his flock as a testimony of his good faith. Abimelech, understanding the significance of the gesture, accepted the offering with respect. That place was called Beersheba, Well of the Oath, in honor of the pact they had established. The ceremony was simple, but its impact would be lasting. Abraham and Abimelech exchanged words of reconciliation and committed themselves to preserving peace among their descendants. They knew their paths would continue to be different, but they shared an undeniable truth. Justice and cooperation transcend differences, and the true greatness of a leader lies in their ability to act with integrity. When the pact was concluded, the servants of both men relaxed their stances. What could have been a spark of conflict turned into a testament of unity. Beersheba would not only represent a vital resource, but also the memory of a day when 2 men, different in origin but equal in their desire to do what was right, chose the path of peace over confrontation. The conflict over the wells of Gerar was a turning point in the relationship between Abraham and Abimelech. It not only tested their ability to resolve differences wisely, but also reaffirmed the mutual respect they had built over time. When Abimelech returned to his palace, he reflected on the importance of ruling with integrity. For his part, Abraham saw in that pact a sign that peace was possible, even in a world marked by tensions and territorial disputes. In the days that followed, the wells of Beersheba became a symbol of prosperity and collaboration. Men from both communities worked together to preserve them, demonstrating that peace, though difficult to achieve, was an effort worth making. Thus, in the midst of the arid landscape of Gerar, an agreement between 2 leaders left a legacy of reconciliation and trust that would endure for generations. The friendship between Abraham and Abimelech grew stronger over the years, built upon mutual respect and shared experiences. However, in the heart of the king of Gerar dwelled a secret he had never confessed. It was a deep unease that had accompanied him long before he met Abraham, a recurring dream that visited him on the quietest nights. And now, after his encounter with the patriarch, that dream took on a new and unsettling meaning. One afternoon, as they walked together through the hills near Beersheba, Abimelech decided to open his heart. The king, always strong and resolute, wore an unusual expression of doubt on his face. Abraham, sensing his unease, encouraged him to speak. "Abraham," Abimelech said, stopping under the shade of a tree that softened the sun's heat, "there is something I have wanted to share with you for a long time. Before I met you, long before you set foot on my land, I had a dream that has haunted me ever since. At the time, I did not understand its meaning, but now I feel it is connected to you." The patriarch listened attentively, his face serene, but his eyes reflecting genuine interest. To Abraham, dreams were more than mere images of the subconscious. They were often divine messages, ways in which God revealed His will. "Tell me more about this dream, Abimelech," he said in a calm voice. "Perhaps the Lord will allow us to understand its purpose." The king nodded, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "In my dream, I was walking through a vast desert. Everything around me was arid and lifeless. Thirst consumed me, but there was no water in sight. Then, in the distance, I saw a figure. It was a man holding a vessel full of water. I approached, but his face remained in shadows. Still, his presence was both imposing and comforting. He offered me water, but before I could drink, he said, 'The water you seek is not here. You must receive it from the one I will send.' And then I woke up." Abraham remained silent, reflecting on those words. He knew that the water in Abimelech's dream was not merely a symbol of physical need. It represented something much deeper: truth, connection with the divine, the longing of a soul searching for answers. That dream was not just a mere fantasy. "Abimelech," Abraham finally said, "I believe the Lord was preparing your heart for our encounter. The water you sought is not just water for the body, but a truth that quenches the spirit, a relationship with the God who created the heavens and the earth." Abimelech looked at him with astonishment and a newfound understanding. His encounters with the patriarch had transformed his perspective, not only on life and leadership, but on the very purpose of his existence. Though he had grown up surrounded by traditions that worshiped multiple gods, there was something different about Abraham's God, a power that did not rely on temples or idols, but on a living, personal, and eternal relationship. "I have felt that since I met you," Abimelech replied. "Your faith is not like that of other men. You do not just speak of your God. You live according to His will, even when it is difficult. That has made me question many things about my life and my leadership." Abraham smiled, recognizing the sincerity in the king's words. "Following the Lord is not easy," he admitted. "There are moments when His ways seem incomprehensible, and His will challenges us. But He always fulfills His promises, and His guidance never fails." If you feel this stirring in your heart, Abimelech, it is because the Lord is working within you, calling you to something greater. For the rest of the afternoon, the two men shared reflections on life, faith, and purpose. Abimelech spoke of his desire to be a just leader, to care for his people not only with laws and provisions, but also with wisdom. Abraham, in turn, recounted stories of his relationship with God, from moments of doubt to those of unshakable faith. As they spoke, Abimelech began to see Abraham not only as a friend or ally, but as an instrument of something far greater. The respect he felt for him deepened, not because of his wealth or influence, but because of the way his life reflected the hand of a living and true God. "Abraham, I believe there is a reason our paths have crossed," Abimelech said as the sun began to descend on the horizon. "My dream, our disputes, even the mistakes we made, everything seems to be leading me to understand something I had never considered before. Your God, the one who guides your steps, has also been working in my life, even when I did not realize it. He works in the lives of all." "Abimelech," Abraham replied, "even when we do not see it." His plan is perfect, and He always finds a way to reveal it at the right moment. When they returned to the camp, both men knew that their conversation had deepened their connection even further. For Abimelech, the dream that had troubled him for so long now had a clear purpose. It had prepared him to find in Abraham a model of faith and leadership. For Abraham, the revelation of the dream was a confirmation that the Lord worked in the hearts of people, even in those who did not yet know Him directly. That night, as each man reflected in silence, a special peace enveloped them both. They had shared more than words. They had recognized that, despite their differences, their lives were connected by a greater truth, a truth that would continue to guide them in the days to come. The kingdom of Gerar was at a crossroads. The skies, which once poured rain upon the fertile fields, now remained stubbornly dry. The crops withered under the relentless sun, and the wells began to dwindle. The drought affected not only the land, but also the spirit of the people. Tensions grew in the villages and at court, where the counselors debated how to address the crisis. To this problem were added political challenges. The neighboring nomadic tribes, sensing Gerar's vulnerability, began claiming lands near the borders. The balance Abimelech had maintained for years now wavered. Though he was a capable leader, the weight of the situation began to burden him. One night, as Abimelech meditated in his chamber, his mind turned to Abraham. He remembered the peace the patriarch had brought during the conflict over Sarah, and how the intervention of his God had healed his people. Though Abimelech was not a man who sought help easily, this situation led him to reconsider his stance. At dawn, the king sent a messenger to Abraham's camp, requesting a meeting. Always willing to listen, Abraham accepted the invitation and soon presented himself before Abimelech. The king received him in the palace's main hall, his face reflecting the accumulated weariness of the past weeks. "Abraham," Abimelech began, his tone serious, "my kingdom faces difficult times. The drought has brought hunger, and conflicts with the neighboring tribes threaten our stability. I have sought solutions, but none seem sufficient. I remember how your God intervened when I faced the issue with Sarah. Now I ask you to pray for my kingdom, so that the Lord may show us mercy." Abraham nodded solemnly. It was no small request. The drought and political tensions were signs that something greater was at play. The patriarch, aware of the significance of the moment, asked for time to pray and seek the Lord's guidance. He withdrew to a quiet place near the camp, and there, on his knees with his face bowed, he lifted his voice to heaven. "Lord, you who guide the hearts of men and hold creation in your hands, hear my plea. This king Abimelech has shown justice and has acknowledged your power. Now his kingdom is in danger, and he has come to me seeking your help, not for my merits, but for your mercy. I ask that you bring rain upon his land and peace to his people. Show everyone that you are the one true God, powerful to save and just in your ways." Abraham's prayer continued, each word filled with humility and trust in divine sovereignty. When he finished, the patriarch returned to Gerar to inform Abimelech that he had interceded for him. "I have prayed to the Lord for you and your kingdom," Abraham told him. "I trust that he will answer in his perfect time." That very night, clouds began to form in the sky, dark and heavy, like a renewed promise. The inhabitants of Gerar looked up in amazement, for they had not seen signs of rain in months. At dawn, a gentle drizzle turned into a downpour that drenched the dry fields, filled the wells, and restored life to the land. The rain brought a change in the people's spirits. Tensions eased, and the conflicts at the borders subsided. The neighboring tribes, seeing prosperity return to Gerar, abandoned their attempts to take advantage of the situation. The kingdom, which had been on the brink of despair, regained its stability. Abimelech, witnessing this miraculous turn, summoned Abraham to thank him. "Abraham," the king said with emotion, "your God has answered your prayer. You have interceded for us, and we have seen his power once again. My people and I are grateful, not only for the rain but for the peace it has brought to our hearts." Abraham, with his characteristic humility, replied, "It is not because of me that this has happened, Abimelech, but because of the Lord. He is the one who has heard your cry and shown his mercy. May this rain be a reminder of his power and his goodness." As a gesture of gratitude and recognition, Abimelech proposed renewing the covenant they had made in Beersheba. This would not only be an agreement about the wells, but also a promise of mutual cooperation in times of need. Both men, aware that their relationship was not the result of chance but of a greater plan, sealed the covenant with a simple yet solemn ceremony. The event brought together the leaders of both sides, who shared a sacrifice as a symbol of the peace that had been restored. As the flames consumed the offering, Abimelech reflected on all he had learned from Abraham and his God. Though he still did not fully understand the nature of this invisible God, Abimelech felt a deep reverence for him and for the man who represented him. The divine intervention in the kingdom of Gerar not only strengthened the bond between Abraham and Abimelech, but also left an indelible testimony in the hearts of the people. The story of the patriarch who had interceded for the land and of the God who had responded with mercy was passed down from generation to generation. It was an eternal reminder that, even in the midst of the most difficult trials, faith and justice could open paths to restoration. For Abraham and Abimelech, this episode reaffirmed what they had already sensed. Their paths had crossed for a greater reason, and the hand of God would continue to guide their lives in ways they could not even imagine. One quiet morning, news reached Abraham's camp. Sarah, his wife, had given birth to a son. The child, named Isaac, was not only a blessing but also the fulfillment of a promise God had made decades earlier. For Abraham and Sarah, Isaac was not just their son but living proof that the Lord always keeps his promises, no matter how improbable they may seem. Isaac's arrival transformed Abraham's life and that of his family, but his impact extended beyond their tent, reaching all those around them, including Abimelech. When the king of Gerar heard the news, he could not help but reflect on Abraham's unwavering faith and how his God, the invisible God, was faithful to his word. Abimelech decided to visit Abraham to congratulate him personally, bringing gifts in honor of the child's birth. He arrived at the camp accompanied by some of his men and counselors and was warmly received. To Abraham, the king of Gerar was no longer just an ally, but a close friend. When Abimelech saw Sarah holding the child in her arms, a sincere smile lit up his face. "Abraham, this child is more than a blessing for you and your family," said the king with a reverent tone. "He is a living testimony that the God you follow is faithful and powerful. His birth reminds us all that his promises are fulfilled, even when they seem impossible." Abraham, moved by Abimelech's visit and words, responded with humility. "That is true, my friend. For many years, Sarah and I waited for this moment, sometimes with doubts and fears, but the Lord has shown us that his timing is perfect. Isaac is proof of his faithfulness, and that is why his name means laughter, for he has brought joy into our lives." The entire camp was filled with rejoicing. Men and women shared stories and sang, celebrating the miracle of Isaac's birth with grateful hearts. Abimelech, though accustomed to the luxuries of his palace, felt at peace among this community united by faith and gratitude. It was not just a celebration, it was the manifestation of a deep trust in a God who fulfills his promises. Later, as Abraham and Abimelech walked together through the pastures, the king shared his deepest thoughts. "Abraham, since I met you, I have witnessed things I do not fully understand, but they have left an indelible mark on me. Seeing how your God fulfills His promises has made me reflect on my own leadership and the promises I make to my people. If such a powerful God can be faithful to His word, how could I, a mere man, not strive to fulfill what I promise? Abraham listened attentively, perceiving in the king's words a genuine desire to be a just leader. The Lord shapes us through our experiences. Abimelech, Abraham responded with calmness. We are not perfect, but when we seek to act with integrity and justice, we leave a legacy that transcends our lives. You have shown yourself to be a king who values truth and peace, and that makes you a leader worthy of respect. Abimelech offered a grateful smile. Over time, he had come to admire not only Abraham's unwavering faith, but also his ability to guide his people with love and wisdom. Before departing, the king decided to share some thoughts born from his own experience as a ruler. Abraham, though we come from different paths, I believe there are universal truths that every leader must remember. First, to lead does not mean to impose, but to serve. A good leader cares for his people as a shepherd cares for his flock, ensuring they have what they need to thrive. The patriarch nodded, acknowledging the depth of his words. Second, Abimelech continued, never underestimate the power of promises. Every word we speak carries weight, and keeping them not only strengthens our reputation, but also the trust of those who depend on us. He paused briefly before adding, and third, remember that the most valuable legacy is not one of wealth or power, but of justice and kindness. These are the values that endure in the hearts of future generations. The king's words resonated in Abraham's soul, and deeply moved, he responded with humility. Your words are wise, my friend, and I will keep them in my heart. Isaac is the beginning of a new chapter in my life, and the Lord has shown me that leadership is not only for the present, but also for the future. I will do everything I can to guide my son in the path of faith and justice. When Abimelech departed, both men knew that their relationship had reached a new depth. The birth of Isaac had not only reaffirmed Abraham's faith, but had also inspired the king of Gerar to reflect on his own life and leadership. Though their paths were different, the connection between them had become a living testimony to the power of faith, friendship, and mutual respect. As Abimelech returned to his kingdom, his heart was filled with gratitude. He had found in Abraham not just an ally, but an example of how faith in something greater can transform lives and make a lasting difference. For Abraham, Abimelech's words were a reminder that his mission was not only to lead his family, but also to be a light to those around him. Time passed, but the friendship between Abraham and Abimelech did not fade. On the contrary, it grew stronger. Their meetings, once marked by diplomacy, had evolved into a relationship forged in trust and the certainty that their lives were intertwined by a greater purpose. However, both were aware that their days on earth were finite, and that future generations might forget the covenants sealed with such effort. For this reason, they decided to renew their alliance in Beersheba, ensuring that their legacy would endure beyond their own lives. One morning, Abimelech sent a message to Abraham, proposing to meet again at the place where they had made their first covenant. The reason was clear: to reaffirm their commitment to peace and cooperation between their peoples, and to leave an indelible testimony of what two men can achieve when they walk in justice and in the fear of God. Abraham, with a spirit always inclined toward peace, accepted without hesitation. When the day of the meeting arrived, Beersheba became a scene of expectation and solemnity. Men from both peoples worked in harmony, preparing the altar and arranging everything for the sacrifice that would seal the covenant. Though cultural differences were evident, At that moment, they shared the same purpose: to establish an alliance that would transcend time. The atmosphere was filled with respect and hope. Upon meeting, Abraham and Abimelech exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The misunderstandings and disputes were behind them. Before them lay a new chapter of cooperation and trust. With a calm yet firm voice, Abimelech addressed those present. "Abraham, this covenant we renew today is not only for us, but for those who will come after us. May our descendants remember that true peace is not imposed by the sword, but is born from justice and obedience to a higher power. I swear that my lineage will honor this agreement and live in harmony with yours." Abraham nodded solemnly and replied, "And I will do the same, Abimelech. This place, Beersheba, will bear witness to our alliance, a testament that peace is possible when sought with sincerity and respect. May the Lord, who has guided our steps to this moment, be the witness of this covenant." The ceremony continued with the offering of a sacrifice on the altar. The flames rose to the sky as both men lifted prayers, each according to his understanding, but with the same longing, that divine blessing would rest upon their alliance and their descendants. When everything was concluded, Abraham and Abimelech stepped away from the commotion and sat under the shade of a tree. The king of Gerar, with his characteristic frankness, shared his thoughts. "Obeying God is not easy, Abraham. As a king, I have learned to make decisions according to my own will. But observing your life, I see that true strength lies in submitting to a higher will. It is an act of humility that does not weaken but rather liberates and strengthens." Abraham, with a slight smile, replied, "And you have taught me that justice is the foundation of lasting leadership. I have seen how you have protected your people, how you have resolved conflicts with wisdom, and how you have sought peace when others would have chosen war. The Lord values leaders who govern with righteousness." In silence, they contemplated the horizon. The land around them, with its hills and wells, would bear witness to the promise they had just sealed. They knew the future would bring challenges, but they trusted that the example they had set would guide those who came after them. As they bid farewell, both men did so with the certainty that their alliance was not merely a pact between them, but an agreement sealed under the watchful eyes of God. Beersheba, with its wells and its altar, became an eternal symbol of reconciliation and cooperation. As Abimelech returned to Gerar and Abraham to his camp, their hearts were at peace. They knew that, though their paths were different, they were united by a greater purpose: to be witnesses of faith, justice, and hope for future generations. The covenant of Beersheba was not just a pact between two leaders, but an eternal testimony that, even in a world marked by divisions and conflicts, peace and justice could flourish when men united under the guidance of a divine purpose. Over the years, the agreement between Abraham and Abimelech not only brought stability to their people, but also set a precedent in a region where disputes were common. The friendship between these two leaders, so different in culture and position, became a living example that true peace is achieved when justice, obedience to God, and mutual respect are placed above all differences. Gerar, a land once known for rivalry and disputes over resources, transformed into a symbol of coexistence. The borders between the domains of Abraham and Abimelech were respected, and those who grew up under this covenant learned that agreements sealed with integrity were not mere words but commitments capable of changing the course of history. The servants of both leaders, who had once been at odds, learned to coexist and cooperate. The stories of the friendship between Abraham and Abimelech were told around campfires and in village councils, reminding each new generation that even the deepest conflicts could be resolved with faith and justice. Beersheba, the place where the covenant was renewed, became a symbol of hope. The wells, once a source of dispute, remained open to all, serving as a tangible testimony of the cooperation between two men who chose to walk together under God's guidance. But the relationship between Abraham and Abimelech left not only a political legacy, but also a spiritual one. Their friendship demonstrated that faith in God was not a barrier, but a bridge capable of uniting hearts. Abimelech, who initially saw Abraham as a foreigner with unfamiliar customs and beliefs, came to deeply respect the patriarch's faith. In turn, Abraham understood that God could work even through those who did not yet fully know Him. This bond reminded Abraham that justice and kindness were not exclusive to his people, but qualities that could be found in anyone who sincerely sought the truth. By obeying God in the crucial moments of their lives, both men transformed what could have been enmity into a sacred alliance that not only protected their generations, but also glorified the name of God. Abraham's obedience in interceding for Abimelech and Abimelech's humility in recognizing the sovereignty of Abraham's God reveal a profound truth. Faith not only transforms hearts but also shapes relationships. The alliance between these two men was not merely a diplomatic agreement, it was a living testimony that cultural and political differences fade when a greater purpose guides one's steps. Abraham, the nomad chosen by God, and Abimelech, a king with earthly responsibilities, found common ground that transcended their circumstances. It was not merely a matter of convenience, but a demonstration that true peace is born from mutual respect and a genuine desire to learn from one another. Their covenant was not just a contract between two men, it was a reflection of an eternal truth. Where there is justice and faith, there is prosperity. Despite their differences, both understood that leading with righteousness was an inescapable calling, and beyond their own lives their influence endured. Their descendants did not only remember the story of two leaders who made a pact, but the impact of an alliance built on integrity and trust in God. Their example proved that divisions can be overcome when the goal is greater than individual interests. In the final years of his life, Abraham often walked through the fields of Beersheba, observing the wells and the altar that marked the place of his covenant with Abimelech. Each step was a reminder of divine faithfulness and how God had guided each of their encounters. It was not mere coincidence, it was the fulfillment of a divine plan. Meanwhile, from his palace in Gerar, Abimelech instructed his sons and counselors on the importance of acting with integrity and seeking peace. He knew that the power of a leader did not lie solely in his ability to govern, but in his commitment to justice and truth. He taught them that true inheritance was not wealth or territory, but the legacy of obedience and righteousness. The story of Abraham and Abimelech is not just the account of two men who managed to coexist in harmony. It is a lesson for all generations. It reminds us that when faith, justice, and respect are the foundation of a relationship, no barrier is insurmountable. It teaches us that despite our differences, the desire to honor God and seek the well-being of others can unite even those who seem to stand on opposite ends. Thus, the covenant of Beersheba was etched into history as a symbol of reconciliation, an echo of the transformative power of faith and obedience, a testimony that when men walk under divine guidance, even the most impossible conflicts can become opportunities to build something eternal.